7 everyday mistakes that speed up brain aging. What if the way your parents age, or the way you yourself are aging right now, has less to do with genetics than anyone ever told you? Researchers estimate that genetics may account for less than half of the picture when it comes to cognitive decline, which means the rest may be shaped by choices made every single day, often without anyone noticing. Before we go any further, a quick note. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have concerns about your memory, thinking, or overall brain health, it may be helpful to speak with a qualified healthcare professional who knows your history. Here is why this matters so much right now. Somewhere in the next few minutes, you are likely to recognize at least one of these habits in yourself, or in someone you love, a parent, a spouse, an old friend. And if you stay until the end, we will walk through the habit that researchers only recently connected to brain aging, one so ordinary that most families have never once thought to ask their doctor about it. Brain aging is not a single switch that flips one day. It is more like a slow accumulation, similar to how small deposits either build savings or quietly drain an account over the years. Scientists who study cognitive decline often point out that genetics only explain part of the picture. Lifestyle, daily habits, and environment appear to play a much larger role than most people assume. So let us walk through 7 everyday mistakes that may be speeding up that process, one by one, starting with something almost everyone underestimates. It is worth pausing here to appreciate just how remarkable the brain actually is. It contains somewhere around 86 billion neurons, each one forming thousands of connections with its neighbors, creating a network far more intricate than anything built by human engineering. That complexity is part of what makes the brain so capable, but it is also part of what makes it sensitive to the everyday conditions we place it under. Just as a finely tuned instrument requires proper care to perform at its best, the brain appears to respond, for better or worse, to the habits we repeat most consistently. Number 1, cutting sleep short night after night. Sleep is often treated like a flexible expense, something we trim when life gets busy, but the brain does not see it that way. During deep sleep, the brain activates something researchers call the glymphatic system, a kind of internal cleaning process that helps clear out metabolic waste, including proteins that have been linked to cognitive decline when they build up over time. When sleep is repeatedly cut short, that nightly cleanup may not finish properly, and some researchers believe this incomplete clearing could contribute to long-term changes in brain health. Consider Margaret, a retired schoolteacher who spent decades believing that 6 hours of sleep was simply her normal. She felt tired most afternoons, but assumed it was just part of getting older. It was not until a routine conversation with her doctor that she learned chronic short sleep may be associated with a higher risk of memory difficulties later in life. Margaret's story is not meant to alarm you. It is meant to show how easily a habit can hide in plain sight, dressed up as normal, ordinary tiredness. The encouraging part is that sleep is one of the most changeable habits on this list. Small, consistent adjustments, like keeping a regular bedtime or reducing screen exposure before sleep, may support better sleep quality over time. The brain, much like the rest of the body, tends to respond well to consistency. It also helps to understand why quality matters just as much as quantity. Sleep unfolds in cycles, moving between lighter stages and the deeper stages where most of that glymphatic cleanup appears to happen. Frequent interruptions, whether from noise, discomfort, or an irregular schedule, can prevent the brain from spending enough time in those deeper stages, even if the total hours in bed seem reasonable on paper. This is one reason sleep specialists often ask not just how many hours someone sleeps, but how consistent and undisturbed those hours actually are. There is also a practical takeaway here that goes beyond simply trying to sleep more. Many people find it useful to think of the hour before bed as a kind of transition zone, a period meant for winding down rather than winding up. Dim lighting, quieter activities, and a consistent wake time even on weekends are small adjustments that sleep researchers frequently mention as supportive habits. None of these steps require dramatic lifestyle changes, yet together they may help the brain complete the restorative work it seems to depend on each night. Number 2, living with constant unmanaged stress. A little stress now and then is a normal part of life, and the body is actually built to handle short bursts of it quite well. The concern researchers focus on is chronic stress, the kind that lingers for weeks, months, or even years without much relief. When stress becomes constant, the body maintains elevated levels of cortisol, a hormone that in excess and over long periods has been associated in some studies with changes in a brain region called the hippocampus, which plays a central role in memory and learning. Think of cortisol like a smoke alarm that is supposed to go off only when there is an actual fire. It is incredibly useful in an emergency, but if that alarm never stops ringing, even when there is no danger, the constant noise starts to wear on the entire system. That is roughly how chronic stress appears to affect the brain over time, based on current research. James, a small business owner in his 50s, described feeling like his mind was foggier during the years he was juggling financial pressure and long hours. He was not diagnosed with anything serious, but he noticed that when his stress eased, his ability to focus and recall details seemed to improve as well. Stories like this are common, and they highlight why stress management is not just about emotional comfort. It may also be an investment in long-term brain health. What makes chronic stress particularly tricky is how gradually it tends to build. Unlike an injury or an illness with a clear starting point, ongoing stress often accumulates so slowly that people adjust to it without realizing how much it has changed their baseline. A racing mind at bedtime, difficulty concentrating during simple tasks, or a short temper over minor inconveniences can all be easy to dismiss as personality traits rather than signs of an overworked stress response. Researchers have also looked at how stress management techniques, such as regular physical activity, mindfulness practices, or simply spending time in nature, may help regulate cortisol levels over time. None of these approaches are presented as guaranteed solutions, but many studies suggest that people who actively manage stress tend to report better cognitive function and emotional resilience as they age. The underlying idea is fairly simple. Giving the body and mind regular opportunities to downshift out of a heightened state may protect the very systems that stress otherwise strains. Number 3, sitting for most of the day. Modern life has quietly made sitting the default posture for millions of people, whether at a desk, in a car, or in front of a screen at home. The trouble is that physical movement appears to do far more for the brain than most people expect. Exercise has been associated with increased blood flow to the brain and may support the release of proteins that help maintain healthy connections between brain cells. It helps to picture the brain as an organ that thrives on circulation, similar to how a garden depends on consistent watering. When movement is limited for long stretches, that circulation may become sluggish, and some researchers believe this could contribute to slower cognitive processing over time. The good news is that the amount of movement needed to make a difference does not have to be extreme. Even regular walking has been linked in various studies to potential cognitive benefits. Robert, a retired accountant, began taking short walks after lunch simply to break up his day. He was not chasing any particular health goal. Months later, he mentioned to his family that he felt sharper during afternoon conversations, something he had not expected from such a small change. Whether or not that improvement was purely coincidental, his experience reflects a pattern researchers have observed again and again, that movement and mental clarity often travel together. One reason movement may matter so much is its connection to a protein researchers refer to as brain-derived neurotrophic factor, often shortened to be DNF. This protein appears to support the growth and survival of neurons, and physical activity has been associated with higher levels of it in several studies. Think of it less as a single magic ingredient and more as one part of a larger system that seems to respond positively when the body is regularly in motion. It is also worth noting that movement does not need to happen in a gym to count. Gardening, climbing stairs, dancing in the kitchen, or simply choosing to walk instead of drive for short errands all appear to contribute to the same underlying pattern of increased circulation and activity. For many people, the biggest obstacle is not motivation, but the assumption that only intense exercise counts, when in reality, consistency in everyday movement seems to matter just as much as intensity. Number 4, letting social connections fade. Loneliness is often discussed as an emotional issue, but a growing body of research suggests it may also be a brain health issue. Social interaction requires the brain to process language, read facial expressions, interpret tone, and respond in real time, all of which appear to provide a kind of natural mental exercise. When social contact becomes rare, that stimulation decreases as well, and some studies have associated chronic social isolation with a higher risk of cognitive decline in older adults. Dorothy, a widow in her 70s, spent nearly a year mostly at home after her husband passed away. Her family noticed she seemed less engaged in conversations, more repetitive in what she shared, and less curious about the world around her. When she eventually joined a weekly community group, her daughter described the change as almost like watching a light slowly turn back on. This does not mean social connection is a guaranteed fix for anything. It simply reflects what many researchers now believe, that meaningful human interaction may be more closely tied to brain health than most people ever consider. It is worth remembering that connection does not have to mean constant socializing. Even small, regular interactions, a phone call, a shared meal, a conversation with a neighbor, may help keep the brain engaged in ways that solitary routines often do not. There is also an emotional layer to this that deserves attention. Loneliness has been associated in research not only with cognitive changes, but also with increased markers of inflammation and altered sleep patterns, both of which connect back to the very habits we have already discussed. In that sense, social connection does not act in isolation. It appears to be woven into a broader web of habits that either support or undermine brain health together. Community programs, volunteer work, faith groups, and even structured hobby classes are frequently mentioned by researchers as accessible ways older adults in particular can maintain regular social contact. The specific activity seems to matter less than the consistency of genuine interaction it provides. For many families, simply checking in on an aging parent or relative a little more often and encouraging their continued participation in group activities may be one of the more overlooked ways to support long-term cognitive well-being. Number 5, ignoring hearing loss. This is one of the most surprising items on this list, and it is exactly the one we hinted at earlier. Hearing loss is often treated as a minor inconvenience, something people quietly adjust to by turning up the television or asking others to repeat themselves. But in recent years, researchers have found a connection between untreated hearing loss and an increased risk of cognitive decline, and the reasoning behind it is fascinating. When hearing becomes difficult, the brain has to work significantly harder just to interpret sound, pulling cognitive resources away from other functions like memory and comprehension. Over time, this extra strain, combined with reduced auditory stimulation, may contribute to changes in brain structure. Some researchers describe it as a kind of quiet overload, where the brain becomes so occupied trying to fill in auditory gaps that other mental processes gradually receive less attention. Harold, a retired mechanic, had noticed his hearing declining for years, but avoided getting it checked because he associated hearing aids with feeling old. It was only after his grandchildren pointed out that he seemed to be withdrawing from conversations that he agreed to an evaluation. He later said that once he addressed his hearing, family gatherings felt less exhausting and far more enjoyable. Stories like Harold's are part of why healthcare professionals increasingly encourage regular hearing checks, not just for communication, but potentially for long-term brain health as well. What makes this connection especially compelling is how indirect it is. Hearing loss does not damage the brain directly in the way an injury might. Instead, researchers believe the relationship works through a combination of factors, including that constant cognitive strain we mentioned, reduced social engagement as conversations become harder to follow, and less overall auditory stimulation reaching the brain. Each of these factors connects back to habits we have already discussed in this video, which shows just how interconnected brain health really is. Perhaps the most important takeaway here is how treatable this particular risk factor can be. Hearing aids, assistive devices, and simple communication strategies are widely available, and several studies have suggested that addressing hearing loss earlier rather than later may help reduce some of the associated cognitive strain. Yet surveys consistently show that many people wait years after first noticing symptoms before seeking help, often out of stigma rather than necessity. Number 6, eating a diet high in processed sugar. Diet is one of those topics everyone has heard about in some form, yet the brain-specific impact of sugar often gets overlooked. Diets consistently high in processed sugar and refined carbohydrates have been associated in research with increased inflammation throughout the body, including within the brain itself. Some studies have also linked high sugar diets to insulin resistance patterns that may affect memory-related regions of the brain over time. A helpful way to think about this is that the brain, despite weighing only about 3 pounds, uses roughly 20% of the body's total energy. It depends on a steady, balanced fuel supply rather than the sharp spikes and crashes that come from sugary snacks and drinks. When that fuel source becomes chronically unstable, some researchers believe it places additional stress on the very systems responsible for clear thinking and memory formation. Susan, a grandmother who had grown used to an afternoon routine of soda and pastries, began noticing frequent brain fog by early evening. After gradually shifting toward more balanced meals, she reported feeling more mentally steady throughout the day. Her experience is not presented here as proof of anything definitive, but it echoes a pattern many nutrition researchers have observed, that consistent, balanced nutrition may support more consistent thinking. Beyond blood sugar swings, some researchers have also examined how diets high in processed sugar may influence the gut, and by extension, the brain. The gut and brain communicate through a complex network sometimes called the gut-brain axis, and emerging research suggests that diet-driven changes in gut bacteria could play a role in inflammation levels throughout the body, including the brain. This area of research is still developing, but it adds another layer to why nutrition experts often emphasize whole foods over heavily processed options. None of this means the occasional dessert or sugary treat poses any serious threat. The concern researchers highlight is about consistent, long-term dietary patterns rather than isolated indulgences. Small shifts like adding more vegetables, whole grains, and healthy fats while gradually reducing reliance on processed snacks are commonly cited as supportive steps, without requiring an all-or-nothing approach to eating. Number 7, living in a state of constant digital distraction. This final habit may be the most relevant to modern daily life, and it is one many people have never considered a health issue at all. Constantly switching between phones, notifications, tabs, and conversations, often referred to as chronic multitasking, appears to place ongoing demand on the brain's attention systems. Unlike focused, single-task thinking, this kind of fragmented attention does not allow the brain the deeper processing time it seems to need for tasks like memory consolidation. Some researchers compare this to trying to have several important conversations at once, none of them getting your full attention, all of them competing for the same limited mental space. Over time, this constant partial attention has been associated in preliminary research with reduced ability to concentrate deeply, and in some studies, with changes in memory performance. Because digital distraction is such a new and widespread part of daily life, researchers are still working to fully understand its long-term effects, but early findings suggest it deserves far more attention than it currently receives. Linda, a marketing professional in her 40s, described her days as a constant blur of notifications, messages, and half-finished thoughts. She began setting aside short periods of uninterrupted focus each day, free from her phone, and noticed she could retain information from meetings far more easily. Her experience reflects a growing interest among researchers in something sometimes called attention hygiene, the idea that how we manage focus may be just as important to brain health as diet or sleep. There is also a generational angle worth mentioning here. While younger adults often grew up with constant digital stimulation, older adults navigating smartphones and social media for the first time later in life may experience a different kind of cognitive load, one shaped by unfamiliarity rather than habit. Researchers studying both groups have found that regardless of age, deliberately structured periods of focus, sometimes called deep work, tend to correlate with stronger performance on memory and attention-based tasks compared to constant task switching. Simple strategies mentioned across various studies include turning off non-essential notifications, setting specific times to check messages rather than responding instantly, and creating short technology-free windows during the day. These are not framed as strict rules, but as small experiments people can try to see how their own focus and memory respond, since individual experiences with attention and technology can vary considerably. Bringing all of this together, brain aging is shaped by far more than genetics alone. Sleep, stress, movement, social connection, hearing health, nutrition, and focused attention all appear to interact in ways that researchers are still working to fully understand. One statistic worth remembering from earlier in this video is that the brain relies on roughly 20% of the body's total energy, despite making up only a small fraction of total body weight, which helps explain why these everyday habits carry so much influence over how it ages. What stands out most across all 7 of these habits is how interconnected they truly are. Poor sleep can heighten stress, chronic stress can discourage movement, reduced movement can affect mood and social engagement. Social withdrawal can make untreated hearing loss easier to ignore, and constant digital distraction can quietly displace the very rest and connection the brain seems to need most. Rather than 7 separate problems, it may be more accurate to think of them as different threads of the same underlying pattern, one where small improvements in one area often support improvements in the others. None of this means small mistakes guarantee decline, and none of it means perfection is required. It simply means awareness matters, and small, consistent changes may make a meaningful difference over time. If you noticed yourself nodding along to more than one of these habits, you are certainly not alone, and recognizing them is often the first meaningful step toward change. Which of these 7 habits surprised you the most, and which one do you think you might work on first? Let us know in the comments below, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If you found this video helpful, consider sharing it with someone who might benefit, and subscribe for more clear, evidence-based conversations about brain health and healthy aging.